All right, let's jump right into a story that is just, honestly, it's incredible. We're going to 1940s colonial Nigeria. And this is a story about a whole lot of things: economics, politics, a huge clash of civilizations. But really, at its heart, it's about how thousands of organized women did something that sounds completely impossible. They took down their own king. And you know what? We're going to start this right at the end, right at the climax, because the results of this whole affair is so extraordinary. It honestly sounds like something out of a movie, but I promise you, it was very, very real. So I want you to picture this. The late 1940s, the city of Abeokuta in Nigeria, and 10,000 women are gathered together. Now, they weren't there for a festival or the market. No, they were there as a single, powerful, unified force of protest. Just imagine that sight: 10,000 women surrounding the king's palace, their voices joined together in songs of defiance. Their dancing wasn't just a celebration, it was a declaration of strength, demanding nothing less than radical change. And these weren't just angry shouts. These were precise, sophisticated political demands. The group they formed, the Abeokuta Women's Union, or AWU, had a clear platform. First, get rid of the unfair flat rate tax on women. And second, and this is so crucial, they demanded representation in their own government. Their slogan was powerful and, well, it should sound pretty familiar: no taxation without representation. So what happened? After years of writing petitions, staging protests, and applying relentless pressure, they won. The Iyalode, their king, who had sided with the British colonial government against them, was actually forced to give up his throne in 1949. I mean, can you imagine? It was a victory so total, so stunning, it sent absolute shockwaves through the entire colonial system. So that's the big question, right? How on earth was this possible? How did 10,000 women in colonial Nigeria pull this off? Well, to really understand their success, we have to look past the protests themselves. We need to go back in time, to the world that existed before the British ever showed up. A world that gave women a very, very different kind of power. To really get to the bottom of this revolt, we first have to understand this society that these women were fighting to protect. In doing that, well, it means we have to challenge some of our most fundamental ideas about how a society is even structured. Okay, now this is a mind-bending but absolutely brilliant argument from the scholar Oyeronke Oyewumi. What she's saying is that in pre-colonial Yoruba society, our Western idea of woman as a built-in secondary social class, it just didn't exist. The main way they organized their society wasn't based on your biology or your gender. It was based on seniority, on your age relative to the person you were talking to. So what does that mean in practice? It means your social identity was fluid. It could change. Your authority and your place in the social order depended entirely on who you were interacting with at that moment. Unlike in the West, your anatomy didn't lock you into a permanent hierarchy where one group is automatically seen as less than another. It was all relational, not fixed from birth. And this right here is a perfect example of how that female power was baked right into the system. The Iyalode, this was not some ceremonial, feel-good role. No way. She was a high-ranking chief, a true political heavyweight. Her job was to represent the interests of all women, and she did it from her own seat on the King's Council. She had actual constitutional power to make and judge laws. And that power structure went deep into the economy, too. You see, the markets were the absolute core of the Yoruba economy, and guess who ran them? The women. The Iyalode was democratically elected by the other market women to run the whole show. Think of her as the kingdom's chief financial officer. She controlled the flow of trade, collected taxes. She was in charge of the money that kept the entire state running. And it didn't stop there. Just look at this whole ecosystem of powerful female roles. They were woven into every part of society: political, spiritual, even military. You have the Aya Kekere, who literally placed the crown on the king's head. You have spiritual leaders responsible for keeping the peace. It was a true dual-sex political system, a genuine balance of power. But then, into this incredibly balanced world, came the British colonial administration. And they brought with them a worldview that was so completely different, so alien, that it just could not understand, and frankly would not tolerate, this system of female authority. It was a total collision of worldviews. The British saw everything through a rigid, unchangeable lens of gender and race. To them, the idea of women holding real institutional power was just unthinkable. So they imposed their own Victorian ideals, pushing the idea that a woman's place was in the home, completely ignoring the fact that women were the backbone of the economy. They began to dismantle a balance that had worked for centuries. So, what was their first move? They systematically took apart the old structures. They created these new governing bodies, like the Egbo United Government, that were, by design, exclusively for men. Just like that, the Iyalode was shut out. The institutional power that women had held for generations was deliberately and methodically erased. Their voices were silenced. Now, when you take away someone's political power and then add new economic burdens on top of that, you've basically created a powder keg. And the spark that finally lit the fuse was a new, deeply unfair tax that was imposed directly on women. This resistance didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Oh no, this anger had been simmering for decades, going all the way back to the Adubi War in 1918. But the organized strategic movement really came together with the creation of the Abeokuta Women's Club, led by the absolute force of nature that was Fumilayo Ransome-Kuti. So when the king, with British backing, hiked the tax on women in 1946, a tax they had zero say in, the AWU was ready to fight. And what they did next was just a masterclass in political organizing. This wasn't a mindless riot. The AWU was strategic. First, they tried diplomacy. They wrote these incredibly detailed, well-researched petitions and demanded meetings. They argued their case logically. It was only when they were completely ignored and disrespected that they escalated, moving to mass protest and civil disobedience. They used their collective power to grind the whole system to a halt. Which brings us right back to where we started, to that incredible victory. Because now, with all this context, we can see that this was about so much more than just money. This was a fight for their entire world. And what a victory it was. They did what everyone thought was impossible. The king was gone, the tax was gone, and, maybe most importantly, they forced the system to bend. They won 4 seats on the local council, clawing back a piece of the representation that had been stolen from them. They proved their power could not and would not be ignored. And this is the real takeaway here. The Abeokuta Women's Revolt was this incredibly profound act of resistance. These women weren't just fighting a tax, they were fighting for the very soul of their society. They were defending a world where women's power was normal, it was respected, it was built into the system, and it was seen as absolutely essential for a healthy community. This was a powerful, real-world expression of indigenous feminism in action. This old Yoruba proverb just sums it all up perfectly, doesn't it? A society, just like a bird, needs 2 wings, male and female, to be balanced, to function properly, to actually soar. The women of Abeokuta weren't just angry about an injustice, they were trying to mend a broken wing on their society. And in doing so, they left behind this incredible legacy of power, strategy, and resilience that still has so much to teach us today.